for all the for all the presenters, I hope that it's okay that we record the proceedings this morning. Okay, so I think we can already start. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. So let me welcome all of you to this panel session E3 on poverty alleviation and labor economics that will focus on issues related to gender, cash transfers, and wage differentials and price setting. I am Randy Tuanyo of the Ateneo de Manila University, who will be moderating this session. Before we begin, may I just remind all of the participants to please sign up in the online attendance sheet, the link, which will be posted in the chat. And for this morning, there will be 3 papers that will be presented in the session, and which will be followed by the open forum. So I will give the paper presenters 20 minutes to present per paper, and then we will have an open forum. And then towards the end, there will be some closing remarks by the panel before we end up. I just like to inform you that the first speaker has a class later. So I've given him the privilege of presenting first, and maybe after his presentation, we'll have an open forum. We'll get maybe 1 or 2 questions. So before we proceed to the second speaker. Okay, so let me introduce the different papers so we can go directly to the paper presentations. The first paper will be that of Michael Batu and Bosu Seyo of the University of Fraser Valley, entitled Gender Roles and Safety of Women at Home in the COVID-19 Era, Evidence from 101 Countries. Dr. Basu, who also used to be with the University of Windsor and the Ontario Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration, both in Canada, will be presenting. This study will analyze the impact of travel restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic on the safety of women at home and home production responsibilities, using Google's community mobility reports to measure changes in travel patterns, and Facebook's survey of gender equality at home to measure changes in home production and safety at home during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this will be done for 101 countries. The second paper will be that of Janelle S. Chu and Vince Asen Siao of the De La Salle University, entitled Gender Roles and Safety of Women at Home in the COVID-19 Era. It's the cash transfer and temptation goods, and analysis of the impact of cash transfers on poor households' consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages in the Philippines. Ms. Chu, who is a master's student in economics, will be presenting. The study analyzed the impact of cash transfers on sugar intake consumption. Sugar intake has been increasing globally and locally, while Philippine institutions continue to provide cash transfer to poor households. Literature found varying impacts on expenditure, consumption, and temptation goods, but these are mostly focused on alcohol and tobacco. So this paper by Ms. Chu and also Mr. Yao is unique, looking into the impact of cash transfer on other goods such as sugar. And last but not the least, the paper will be of Dr. Carlos Santiago and also Dr. Noel de Guzman of the Ateneo de Manila University, entitled Empirical Analysis of Gender Effects of Wage Differentials and of Employment on Inflation Rate. The structural features of labor markets, such as the microeconomics of wage setting, are long suspected to have implications on inflation and employment. And the new Keynesian consensus paradigm highlights the role of market imperfections in generating these macroeconomic pathologies. So one imperfection overlooked in traditional macroeconomics is the gender wage differential. And this study empirically tests whether this type of wage differential significantly influence the price-setting behavior of firms in the Philippines. So ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our first presenter, Dr. Michael Basu. Michael.
Thank you, Dr. Tuanyo, for the introduction. It's Dr. Batu. So Basu is different. So Kaushik Basu, who's an economist.
Sorry,
So it's a different person. But I happen to know Kaushik, so he's another professor. So anyway, the title of our work, which is co-authored with Dr. Bosu Seyo, is entitled Gender Roles and the Safety of Women at Home in the COVID-19 Era, Evidence from 101 countries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen so that you can see my slides. Okay, let me see if I could do, there it is. Okay, so thank you for having me here at the Philippine Economic Society conference. It's a pleasure to present this paper to you today. Unfortunately, I have to head out at 9:45 Philippine time because I have to teach game theory at 10 p.m. So I have an evening class of game theory to teach later. So, all right. So let me tell you about what motivated us to write this paper. So COVID-19 has impacted our lives. Okay? And the long-term scarring effects of COVID-19 pandemic are yet to be fully understood. And the emerging evidence from the economics literature suggests that women have been affected more severely by public health measures. Let me give you several examples. In a survey of 6 countries that includes China, South Korea, Japan, Italy, United Kingdom, and the United States, Dang and Nguyen found that women are 24% more likely to permanently lose their jobs than men because of the pandemic, and that women expect their labor income to fall by 50% more than men do. In another paper, using real-time data from the United Kingdom, Sevilla and Smith documented that families, families that have been doing the equivalent of a working week in childcare, okay, with mothers bearing most of the burden during the period of lockdowns and travel restrictions. In another study, Hupkau and Petronolo also reported that for the case of the United Kingdom, women provided on average a larger share of increased childcare needs, and that a significant percentage of fathers became the primary childcare providers. And finally, in terms of gender violence, Campbell 2020 found that an increase in the frequency of domestic abuse and family violence around the world since the social isolation and quarantine measures came into force. So this is the current evidence on economics literature about our topic. Now, what did we do different? So let me show you what did we do different. So number one is that if you noticed in those papers, they were limited to a few studies, like 5 countries, like let's say China, South Korea, they're limited in group of like small countries, like 5, or they focus on a single country. In our case, we expanded our analysis to cover 101 countries. And we believe to date that this paper is one of the few that actually used evidence for multiple, like more than 100 countries. Now, the question is, so if we were doing an expanded analysis for 100 countries, how are we able to find data? Well, we used what we call big data. And where did we get it from? We got it from social media. So particularly, we used data from Facebook and we used data from Google. So I will show you later how we were able to get that data, and possibly if there are other researchers, of course, I think all of the audience are researchers here. How can you use these data for your own research? Okay, they're publicly accessible actually. And finally, unlike those other papers that I mentioned earlier, we took into account the endogeneity in terms of the relationship between travel restrictions and dependent variables of interest. Because you see, when for this particular topic, there was a lot of papers that were written, and I'm assuming that the authors did it in a hurry because there was this rush of literatures in the beginning of the pandemic that that researchers want the papers to get out. They were writing many studies, but what we have observed when we did the literature scan was that all of these papers did not seriously take into account endogeneity. So in our case, we did. So I'm going to show you later how we were able to conduct our identification strategy. So what did we find? Okay, so what did we find? So our analysis reveals two key findings. Number one is that women are more likely to feel less safe at home during lockdowns. And we find that the percentage of women who felt safe at home increases with more stringent travel restrictions. Also, the marginal effect of travel restrictions to safety at home is statistically significant. We found that result. Number two, while home production for both men and women increased during lockdowns, men saw a larger increase relative to women. And additionally, we find that the marginal effect of travel restrictions was bigger for men than for women, and this marginal effect is also statistically significant. All right, so where did we get the data from? So I mentioned about the data. So we got the travel restrictions data from Google's community mobility reports. So you can actually download this. This is publicly available. Okay, so this came from users of the mobile app version of Google with location history settings enabled. Okay, and it shows how visitors to or time spent in categorized places change compared to a given baseline day, which is the median value from the 5-week period from January 3rd, 2020 to February 6th, 2020. So let me explain a little bit what happened. So what Google did was they have data on mobility coming from cell phones because they're able to track, pretty much Google can track what we all do if we have the settings enabled. And what they did was, okay, they have a baseline of travel data, okay, in 6 location categories. It's right there. So you have grocery and pharmacy, parks, transit stations, retail and recreation, workplaces, and residential areas. So they have this mobility data for these 6 location categories. Okay, they have the data every week. Okay, every week. I'm assuming even they have daily on this one, but the one that we saw was every week. And then every week after the lockdowns, which is beginning after February 6th, they compared it with the baseline coming from the weeks prior to the lockdowns. Okay, so in other words, there's a reference period, and that reference period is the 5 weeks, a 5-week period from January 3 to February 6, 2020. And then we compute the travel restrictions variable as the average in mobility to and from residences within a country from February 15 to January 2020. So our idea is that, okay, if the travel restrictions, our proxy is the increase in travel to residential areas. Okay, and you will see later, like after the lockdowns, increase in travel to residential areas actually increased because people were staying at home. And travel to other areas like groceries, parks, etc., declined after the lockdowns. It's right here. Okay, so this is the data from February 15, 2020 to June 30, 2020, 7-day moving average. Actually, my apologies there. The data that we have was daily. We have daily data on this. And what we can clearly see is that for most countries all over the world, right? Around mid-March, it's the time when this is the first wave of COVID. We see that travel to groceries, transit stations, workplaces, parks, retail and recreation have decreased, and travel to residential areas increased. Okay, so the phrase "travel to residential areas" is kind of a misnomer, but that is the term that we actually use, like travel to residential areas. Now we have data for this, of course, across countries, and we have here a heat map. And we can see here that for the Philippines, around that time, the travel restrictions were quite stringent. okay, as shown here, right? Very, very dark orange. But then Philippines was not alone in this. Other countries also imposed strict or stringent mobility measures. For instance, like India, okay, South Africa, Italy, Portugal, Morocco, most of South America. Some countries in Central America impose stringent travel restrictions. Now, so the travel restrictions variable that you saw here, okay, this is our main variable of interest. So this is not our dependent variable. It's not. It's our main variable of interest. Okay. So in other words, in regression, this is our x. This is the x of interest. Okay. Now, our dependent variable comes from Facebook. Okay. So in Facebook, they have this data on it's called Survey on Gender Equality at Home. And the number of respondents for this survey is almost close to 500,000. And this covers 208 countries in 80 languages across the globe about their lives at home, including changes to their lives during the pandemic. So from here, they have, so in other words, although they have close to 500,000 respondents, Facebook aggregated this data for each country. Okay, so they have data for each country. So there are many variables that Facebook has in that data set. And of interest in that data set are the following. The first dependent variable is this. It's the percentage of women or women respondents in each country who agreed or strongly agreed with the statement, there are times when I felt uncomfortable or even unsafe in my house. That's the first one. So this is our proxy for safety at home. And the second dependent variable is the simple average of the percentage of respondents in each country who felt an increase in the amount of time spent caring for family members and doing household chores, such as cooking, cleaning, shopping for food, and collecting water. Pretty much this is home production. Okay, so this is like our proxy for home production. All right, so we have data from Facebook that is aggregated by country. We have data from Google, which is daily, but then it's available for every country. So we match the data, okay? Now, one concern, well, actually one, it's actually a major concern, is endogeneity. Because you see, safety of women at home can be, I mean, of course, we know the lockdowns influence safety of women at home, right? But it's also possible that during the times that there was a lockdown, the woman is at home and left the house because the woman wants to avoid being beaten by the husband. So in other words, it's possible that the lockdowns might not really pick up what we really want. Okay, so there might be, of course, there might be case of reverse causality and omitted variables that may cause this. So what we did was we exploited the unique timing in the collection of the Google and Facebook data. So Google mobility data is beginning February 15, and the Facebook survey on gender equality at home was collected in July 2020. So we consider the time horizon in the Google mobility data prior to the Facebook data being collected, specifically from Feb 15 to June 30, 2020. So the idea is timing, okay? The safety of women at home, the data was collected July. Google data, we consider the data that was collected prior to that, okay? So that we can study like the lag effect of lockdowns on the safety of women at home and also on home production. Now, of course, there are other concerns. Yes.
Sorry, Michael, you have 5 minutes. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay, this will be fast. So other concerns would be compatibility and representativeness of the Google and Facebook data, and heteroskedasticity. Okay, so here's the results. So what we found was that a 1% increase in mobility to residential locations increases the percentage of women who said that they are less safe at home by 0.6%. And this result is significant at the 1% level. We also have other dependent variables. So we have the intensity of home production for women. We found that for every 1% increase in the mobility to residential locations, the intensity of home production for women increases by more than 1%. It's 1.014%. Now, for men, we found that the intensity of home production is actually a little bit higher. It's 1.09. So 1% increase in mobility to residential locations increases the intensity of home production for men by 1.09%. And of course, statistically significant at 1%. And we employed a battery of tests, which I don't have time to discuss. But the thing is, like, if you ask about omitted variables, I think we were able to cover our bases on this one because we looked at several. So we look at gender norms. Countries have different gender norms and they may play a role. So we included that. We included macroeconomic conditions for each country. We include urbanization rates. We included internet penetration rates. We included the prevalence of domestic violence for each country. We also included distribution of home production. This index is equal to 1 if both the husband, if the male and the female in the household shares the responsibilities at home equally. Freedom index and COVID-19 cases index. So including these variables, we found that the results the results hold. Limitations of the study: while we use new data from social media, it's difficult to determine whether the data gathered from social media are representative of men and women from each country in the sample. So we acknowledge that. And also, data limitations force us to study the short-run effects of pandemic-induced travel restrictions. And while we're able to explain the effect of pandemic-induced limitations of travel, at least partially, we are not able to explain why gender violence has increased during the COVID-19 era. And finally, policies. The policies should be directed in supporting women and girls during and after the pandemic. And governments should put in place systems for women and girls to report gender-based violence, enabled to use the internet for such reports, and access law enforcement in courts more easily. And that concludes my my presentation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael. And let's give Michael a round warm of applause for his presentation. So thanks very much. And as I said earlier, because Michael's leaving in a few minutes for his class, maybe we can open the floor for a few questions. And I see already in the chat that there have been there's one question by Vince, one of our paper authors. Vince, would you like to read your question? Or
yeah, Sir Michael, question lang. I'm just curious if the Google location dataset could be capturing only those from the middle to high income class individuals, or from middle or high socioeconomic status, because I intuitively, I guess, or as an hypothesis, I don't think the lower income class uses GPS services. So do you think this would be a big issue in your results or findings, or hindi naman?
I think it won't matter because, Google does not provide data or information on which income groups the data comes from, because they're claiming it's out of privacy reasons. Google has a lot of things to say about this. But I think it doesn't matter because what we're measuring was mobility, like movement of people. And during the pandemic, the in some countries, I mean, I have to say it, almost all countries, there were little exemptions to travel. If the government imposed a lockdown, almost everybody is subject to that. Okay, regardless of your income, where you are in the income or in income distribution. So I think income distribution matters less. Probably your point is about whether or not these people have cell phones, right? Because you see, like, let's say people in the lower income brackets, they may not have access to the internet, or they may not have cell phones. That may be an issue. However, in terms of the control variables, we control for macroeconomic indicators and GDP across countries. So we may be able to pick a little of that effect. But yeah, thank you for your question. It's actually a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Vince. Are there any other questions or comments on the presentation of Michael? Sige, if done, let me ask a question. You were saying that you would have like to measure gender violence within that home, but I'm not too sure what data sets. So and it seems that you said earlier that one of your control variables is actually gender as well, gender violence. So I don't know how would you be picking up gender violence, no, in such a study, no?
Right. So yeah, that's a good question. We included gender norms. Okay, so gender norms, because some countries have different cultures towards women and girls. So we capture cultural differences there. What we do have as our dependent variable is the percentage of women who felt that they were not safe. Okay, so we do not have as a dependent variable, for example, we do not have, let's say, incidents, like the incidents of women that were harmed, right? Or women that suffered beating from their like intimate partner violence, or IPV. So we don't have that as a dependent variable. Rather, we relied on the Facebook data, or on how they framed the question, which was feelings of safety, like how you felt. Do you feel that you were safe at home during the time that there was a lockdown? Okay. And also the advantage of using Facebook in this kind of study was that the context of their survey was pandemic. That was the context. Okay, so all of the questions in that survey, they relate to the pandemic. So we thought that it would be appropriate to use, but of course we're aware of the pitfalls of using such data. So that's why we added culture as controls. Or we even added like access to the internet, because some women may have suffered violence, but then they have no ways of complaining, right? Because there's no internet, it doesn't work. Yeah, so we took those into consideration.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Maybe a room just for one more question or comment. Sige, so if none, I'd just like to thank again, Michael, for presenting your paper in this seminar. No, it's really a very interesting study. I mean, because well, here in the Philippines, we know that there are gendered impacts of the pandemic, and it's good to know that there are such data sets that can measure it. And I'm sure that if you can also drill down, or maybe if you can drill down into the regions or provinces of the country, I'm sure that we will get also interesting results as you did. So thanks a lot. And I hope that you can, and also thanks for keeping with the time. And I do hope that you can maybe even stay before your class start.
Yes, I'm gonna stay until 5:45. Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay,
It's 9:45 there. Sorry.
Right here. Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot, Michael. Okay. So next, let's go to the presentation by Ms. Janelle Yu on the impacts of a cash transfer on the consumption of sugar drinks. Okay, Janelle.
Hello po. So, wait lang po yung screenshot. Yan. So, Thank you then po for the opportunity to be able to present our paper. This is I'm Janelle Tew, and here with me as well in the meeting room is Vince Yao, who is my co-author with this paper. So our paper is about cash transfers and temptation goods. So an analysis of the impact of cash transfers on poor household consumption on sugar sweetened beverages in the Philippines. So in a global context, sugar intake has been increasing, and we know that high sugar diets are associated to diseases such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases. So in the Philippines, the daily Filipino sugar intake has increased from 14.9 grams in 2005 to 21.4 grams in 2015. So this may be concerning since we know that they are associated with such diseases that I was mentioning previously. And meanwhile, the Philippines has been implementing cash transfer programs to alleviate poverty. But the concern here is that past literature found varying results on its impact on specifically on temptation goods like sugar sweetened beverages, alcoholic beverages. But most of the literature focused on alcoholic beverages, so we wanted to see how it would impact sugar sweetened beverages. So we aim to ask, how do cash transfers alter poor household consumption of sugar sweetened beverages? And do these cash transfers encourage or reduce consumption of these beverages among the recipient households? So our two main objectives for this study would be to determine the characteristics of the households who were likely to receive cash transfers and compare the SSB consumption of poor households with cash transfers to their consumption if they had not received cash transfers. So for our methodology, first let me discuss our data. So our data is actually from the FIES 2015 Volume 2 from the Philippine Statistics Authority. And it is a cross-sectional household level self-reported data. So since we're focusing on poor households, we dropped the non-poor observations on the basis of the national poverty line of 21,936 pesos per year. And so from 41,544 households, we only observed the 8,363 households around the country. So those households that were considered treated were those that received cash receipts from domestic sources. So that meant that our data set is actually 82.71% treated and 17.29% untreated. And for the sugar sweetened beverage consumption, it is actually in peso consumption. So listed here are the ones that we included in our study, which is soft drinks, powdered juices, concentrates and ready-to-drink juices, energy drinks, instant coffee, and powdered cocoa. So for our technique, we use the propensity score matching to eliminate the selection bias, or at least reduce the selection bias among our data set. So we use the Probit model to estimate the propensity scores for each household for treated and untreated. So here we have the propensity score is equal to the participation probability or the probability of the household being treated, which is equal to alpha, which is our intercept, and plus the independent variable plus the slope times the independent variable from our list. So these independent variables are mostly household characteristics. And lastly, we have our error term. So for the matching methods, to show robustness of results, we've used actually, to be exact, there are 5 matching methods, but we mixed the nearest neighbor matching method with the caliper or the radius matching. So now we have nearest neighbor matching with one neighbor restricted with a caliper width of 0.2 And then another nearest neighbor matching, but with 5 neighbors. And we also have kernel matching, and lastly, propensity score weighting by the odds. So our main evaluation is actually estimating the average treatment effects on the treated. So that means that the expected value of the difference in outcomes for the treated and untreated is equal to the expected value of outcome Y1, conditional on the propensity score for the treated observation, minus the expected value of outcome Y0, conditional on the propensity score for the untreated observation. So that means we're comparing treated household observations with untreated households that were in the similar propensity score with the treated households. So results index, for the results, to characterize our data, there are actually 99.32% of the households consuming SSBs. For the probit model results, we had a log likelihood of negative 3,358.8263 and a pseudo R-squared of 0.1278. Then our likelihood ratio chi-square test had a p-value of 0, which meant that all regression coefficients are not simultaneously equal to 0. So for our reference household, we have this household has a head that has no grade completed, and the head works for a private household. The household is a single family in NCR that has no toilet, and their roof are made of strong materials, and their water is from an own use faucet community water system. So the households less likely to receive cash transfers in comparison to our reference household would be those that have older household heads who are high school undergraduates, with more children aged less than 18 years old, and those that are extended families. And households in regions 4A, 4B, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 13 are all less likely to receive cash transfers when in comparison to those living in NCR. And then those with toilet facilities unclassified were less likely to receive cash transfers in comparison to those with no toilet. And lastly, with their own tube or pipe deep well, or relied on tubed or pipe shallow wells as their water source. So for the characteristics of households more likely to receive cash transfers, they have the heads who are working for a private establishment, self-employed without any employer in a family-operated farm or business, or working without pay in own family-operated farm or business. And those living in an ARMM are also more likely to receive cash transfers than those living in NCR. Those with roofs made of light materials or made of mixed but predominantly strong materials were also more likely to receive cash transfers. And lastly, households that had more televisions and refrigerators were more likely to receive cash transfers. I think, sorry, that's a typo. Those that had less televisions and refrigerators were more likely to receive cash transfers. So for comparing our matching quality, actually, most of after matching, the households had similar characteristics, or they were a balanced match. And to compare our matching methods, the most appropriate matching method in the Philippine case is propensity score weighting by the odds, or this is a method where we assign weights based on propensity scores. So it had the lowest covariate standardized differences and covariate variance ratios closest to 1. This is aligned with Stewart 2010 study, wherein it said that the PSM by the odds is better if there are more treated and untreated than untreated. So that is the case for our data set. So for the treatment effect results, we could see that here that all the coefficients for soft drinks are significant at an significance level of 0.05. And it is around 45 to 55 peso decrease in consumption. So for the other beverages here, for the other SSBs, they were all insignificant, including the totality of these beverages. So cash transfers significantly decreased soft drink consumption and may be attributed to increased diet diversity, increased spending on education and health, or perhaps households saw soft drinks as unhealthy. So these are all from the literature. And cash transfers did not significantly affect consumption of other SSBs, which may be because of perception, awareness, and marketing. So perhaps there is a health halo effect. And specifically for this data set, there is a low consumption for concentrates and energy drinks, which may affect its significance, the significance of the treatment effect. So as I've said, the SSBs as a whole was not significantly affected, and the positive and significant income elasticity of demand for each sugar-sweetened beverage for all households, including treated and untreated, are all positive and significant. So for the treated households, they had a lower income elasticity for soft drinks compared to untreated, although they have a higher income elasticity for SSBs as a whole. So perhaps that the positive income effect was overshadowed by the negative substitution effect. And this may be attributed to health seminars of certain CT programs, as you know that like 4Ps, they have mandatory seminars. With this, we made a list of policy recommendations. First, we have including warning labels so that our consumers are more well informed about their purchase and reduce the chances of a health halo effect. And similarly, supplementing this would be regulating advertising and marketing to bolster responsible marketing. So there are times that there are certain drinks that market their products by highlighting some nutritional ingredient in their drink that this way of marketing may make the perception of the people distorted, in the sense that they would be thinking na, oh, this drink is healthy, although technically there is still a lot of sugar in this, for example, concentrate or in this juice. So it would still be unhealthy, but they thought it was healthy because of this some nutritional ingredient that was focused by the marketing. So it's like a marketing strategy. And lastly, by restricting sugar, we could also restrict sugar content. So this would reduce the sugar intake given the same amount of SSB consumption. There had already been studies that reported that they decreased the sugar content of the drink, but the taste perception of the people did not change. So perhaps we could also do that here. So that's it for my presentation po.
Okay, thank you, Janelle, for also the interesting presentation as well. So let's give Janelle a warm round of the applause. So by just clicking the applause button in Zoom. So thanks again, Janelle. Okay, so the next presentation will be made by Dr. Carlos Tabora and also Dr. Noel de Guzman. Who's presenting first, Carlos or okay, so Noel. Yeah, maybe if you can do it in the presenter view. I can show your slides in the presenter. Carlos.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Yeah, thank you for
Yep.
joining
Yep.
us in our presentation. Can you hear me
Yep.
from your end?
Yes,
Thank you.
but maybe we can ask Dr. De Guzman to just Noel. Okay, so it's the center view now. Okay.
Thank you. So the title of our research is Gendered Effects of Wage Differentials and of Employment on Price Inflation in the Philippines. The rationale of our study has 1 to 2 reasons. We study gender because, as you know, structural features of labor market, such as the microeconomics of wage setting, have implications for price inflation and employment. However, still gendered wage differentials are overlooked in traditional macroeconomics, even if recent studies show and provide evidence that they do matter. And in relation to our study, we believe that gendered wage differentials may influence the price setting behavior of firms and in turn perpetuate gendered wage differentials. Recent studies focus on gendered effects on macroeconomic and fiscal policies, except for 1 to 2 studies that we saw of Nayer et al. In 2019 and 2021. These are the findings. For Nayer et al. 2019 and 2021, this relates to our study. Prices are generally lower, marginal costs as well in gender discriminatory environments. And then economic downturns are worse, and productivity utilization are more inefficient in gender discriminatory behaviors. According to the Acunto, female price and inflation expectations are higher when there are fiscal and monetary policies in place. And then according to Aiken, there's lower female labor supply, and if the effects of fiscal and monetary policies are disproportionate on female employment or unemployment rates. Our research question is as follows. Do wage differentials have any effects on price inflation? And our hypothesis is price inflation increases with gendered wage differentials because firms will choose workers with wage rates relatively cheaper than the average wage rate. And this is because more male or female workers are hired than female or male workers if male or female wage rates are relatively cheaper than female or male wage rates, causing male or female wage differentials to persist. Then to give you an overview of the relation between price inflation and male and female wage differentials, we show here a scatter plot of the two variables. The relation between price inflation and male wage differentials is not apparent. The slope of the line is relatively flat. Prices inflation is plotted on Y, and then wage differentials of males are plotted on the x-axis. The same can be observed when price inflation is plotted against female wage differential. The relations is not visible from the scatter plot diagram. I now turn over you to Dr. De Guzman for the theoretical model for testing our hypotheses.
Thank you, Carlos, and good morning to everyone. So for this paper, this is very much a work in progress. It started as an empirical investigation. We wanted to know if wage differentials have any impact on the inflation rate. So along the way, we tried to provide some micro foundations, and we attempted to create a simple microeconomic based model that can possibly support the macroeconomic hypothesis that we are trying to investigate. So we start with the usual specification of firm behavior. So because this is very much a work in progress, as I have said, we start with a simple functional form, the Cobb-Douglas production function, where we assume that the quantity of the good, which basically this is a one good model, is dependent on two types of labor, female and male, and they are symbolized by N sub M, that's male employment, and N sub F, which is female employment. So in modeling, we sort of made some specific assumptions, otherwise we cannot get more specific results. So for the technology or the production function, we assume that productivity, which is A, is neutral. It affects both types of labor equally, but to preserve the difference between male and female workers, we of course maintain the assumption that their output elasticities are different. So nevertheless, we just applied a standard cost minimization optimization program. And of course, the result of this would be a cost function. And it turns out to be a standard cost function. You can see that the firm's cost is a function of the male wage, the female wage, and also output. So of course, the output enters there because we derive the conditional input demand functions. Next slide, please. Okay, so on the side of workers, which basically are also the consumers in the model, we adopted a behavioral assumption that they are wage setters. You know? So by that, we mean we basically, it's not so microeconomic in nature because the starting point is already the wage setting equations, wherein we say that the females have their own wage setting behavior and the males also have their own wage setting behavior. And the usual determinants of wage setting are the expected price level, the unemployment rates, so based on Phillips curve ideas, and well, the Z over there that you can see, Z sub M, C sub F, are just idiosyncratic or gender-specific determinants. So, and then now, in order to operationalize our hypothesis about wage differentials, we just constructed simple, forms like for average wage, it's just the weighted average of female and male workers, where the weights are the employment shares. So our definition of the wage differential is not the usual male wage rate minus female wage rate, but it's rather in ratio form, where the wage differential can be expressed in two ways, either in terms of the difference of the male wage rate relative to the average, or the difference of the female relative to the average. Next slide, please. So doing a lot of messy algebra, which we still have to cross-check or confirm. But anyway, so we are sparing you the messy algebra. The equilibrium quantity that we have derived is this one, and I'm sorry for the small font, but we cannot fit the entire equation in such a small slide. So what we see here is that the Q star, the equilibrium, is a function of productivity, which is the A, somewhere in the middle, the share of the good in the consumer basket, that's the SI. Then the thetas are the levels of employment, respectively for male and for female, theta and 1 minus theta. Then the wage differential, which is the key variable in our model, is the delta M. It's that small thing there in the denominator in the second line. And then we also have income, and then the M at the end is the markup. Okay, next slide, please. So basically from the equilibrium output, we just use the inverse demand function, assuming that the producers are imperfectly competitive. So with a downward sloping demand function, using the inverse demand, we just substituted the equilibrium output to arrive at the equilibrium price. And then here, it pretty much the direction of causality of the variables to the dependent variable just simply reversed, because price and quantity are inversely related. And then finally, next slide, Carlos. So we just derived pretty much a crude measure of inflation that sort of captures the impact of the wage differential. So the wage differential here, if you will notice the delta M, somewhere there on the left side, has a positive, our hypothesis has a positive impact on inflation, which basically foreshadows our insight or our hypothesis that high wage differentials are an indication of inefficiency in the labor market, and therefore they may have repercussions for output in a negative way, which can then impact inflation positively. Next slide, please. Now, to summarize the framework that we are applying, we thought it wise to try to put it in one diagram so that people can inspect it. So once again, this is like a summary of what I just said. There are consumers, there are firms. There's no government in the model, so that's why it's not yet really a complete model. So the consumers basically are engaged in wage setting, but they also are consumers, so they engage also in utility maximization. So what you notice is that it's not the standard consumer problem where the consumer chooses goods versus leisure. Because in our opinion, the consumers, when it comes to the factor market, are wage setters. So we sort of separated the two so that the optimization problem of the consumer is like a two-stage process. For the firms, we applied, as I have said, cost minimization, which you can see on the right side, which is in a way equivalent also to profit maximization. And then we just made sure that the wage demands from the consumer side are consistent with the wage that the firms are willing to pay via the cost function. Okay.
Manuel, sorry, you have 5 minutes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll turn you now over to Carlos.
Okay, thank you, Dr. De Guzman. This is our empirical model for testing our hypothesis. It's based on the theoretical model described by Dr. De Gus earlier. So this is the variable on the left is the actual price inflation, and then the effects of labor productivity is negative, wage differential of male or female is positive, and then um, and the effect of expected price inflation is also positive. The effects of the relative number of male workers to total and of female to total are negative. Then you can see here dummy variables for differences of the constant term across sectors and regions. And then we also interact the dummy variables for, we also have an interaction between the female dummy variable and unemployment rate, recognizing that the effects of unemployment may differ from those of males. And then we also have an interaction for firms that employ almost zero male or female workers in the Philippines. And then we interact them with wage differentials, the relative number of male and of female workers, right, to account for corner solutions. And our data set is from 2013 to 2017. There are missing variables, so we address, there's a lot of endogenous variables arising from missing variables, variable omission, simultaneity, measurement errors. We address those issues by using IVs and two-stage least squares approach. We predict the regressors from the reduced form equations from the simultaneous equations. So these are just variable descriptions, and this shows you the profile of our data set of key variables. This is the change of inflation rate. It's actual minus expected, or the lag value of inflation rate. So this is the change of inflation rate. You can also see here the wage differential, the lag expected price of good I as a proxy for expected price of good I, that you have unemployment rate or female unemployment rate, and then the relative number of male and female workers. Right, so there are 1,632 observations. So we use first difference of the raw variables, of the fitted variables. And then this shows the results of the regression of the change of price inflation on the of wage differentials, the relative number of male and female workers after controlling the other variables. All the signs of the regressors of the coefficients are consistent with our theoretical model, from 1% to 10%. And then the interaction term between firms that employ near zero, if not zero, male or female workers interacted with wage differential is also statistically significant. As you can see here, productivity level decreases price inflation. The model is consistent with the Phillips curve. Price inflation decreases with unemployment rate decreases price inflation. And then this is an interesting finding. Expenditure share of good I may exert downward effect on prices via wage setting, where some employers may have monopsony power over workers, and as workers demand less wage, and consumers if they spend less of their income on other goods. And then male or female workers or their proportion to total workers do not affect output and price for firms that employ only a single gender worker. Okay. That's because they will be using a different production function if they employ only one of the two types of workers. We test our regression of the change of inflation rate using Ramsey's reset. We also check heteroscedasticity. We test jointly the statistical significance of wage differentials, of gendered wage differentials, the relative number of male and female workers using F-test, as well as the interaction of the zero dummy variables with wage differentials, the relative number of male and female workers using F-test. They seem to satisfy the results suggest no functional misspecification. There's no heteroscedasticity. And then gender is at least jointly statistically significant. We also test for reverse causality of price inflation and wage differential using an approach proposed by Gujarati. So we regress wage differentials on the fitted values of the change of price inflation, omitting wage differential. And then also on the residual from that regression. Gujarati provides that if the coefficient of the residual after omitting wage differential from that regression is significant, it may suggest reverse causality. Right? And these are just tests to.
Carlos,
Yes.
can you wrap up?
Right.
I think
Yeah, let me just wrap up the analysis of our results. So on the effects of gendered wage differential on price inflation. So an increase of wage differential is an indication of the maintenance or of the status quo in wage setting. If the wage differential widens, then it may put upward pressure in prices. And then the effects of relative number of male workers and of female workers to total workers. The optimal choice of male and female employment may exert downward pressure in prices because of efficiency in deploying labor. Now, this could be a sign that firms practice efficient occupational segregation by gender. And then the effect of the dummy variable for zero workers and wage differential means that the inflationary effect of wage differential is negated by non-standard employment arrangements where male or female labor demand are corner solutions. And these are sector specific. And these are references. And then, thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Carlos and Noel, for the another very interesting presentation on the effects of gender wage differentials on inflation. So I think we still have Michael still with us. So I think we can now open the floor for any questions or comments on the three papers. So on the effects of travel restrictions on women's safety, and also home work. On the effect of cash by Michael, the effect of cash transfer on sugar-based drinks, soft drinks. You had Janelle who presented earlier, and the inflationary effects of gender wage differentials by Noel and Carlos. Okay, maybe Carlos, maybe any questions that you might have, Michael. May I ask the question, but may I just ask Carlos, just to put the to not share screen anymore. So thanks. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for having me. So my question is for Dr. De Guzman. So when you were doing the model for wage setting, did you consider bargaining? Because if there's bargaining, that may actually reduce the differential. So for instance, like in a unionized environment, for example, which is fairly common across many industries in the Philippines, there is evidence of a slim differential because the wages are standardized. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is you may have also cases where in the public sector. So if for example, you have public sector employees, the public sector, they are usually like plantilla workers, and they are there's little gender imbalances there within, like, so I'm talking about specific sector like in government. So there's actually two questions there. So one is whether or not you consider bargaining, and second is whether you considered variations across industry to be moderating factors to affect the differential. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Batu. The first question on whether we considered bargaining, that issue came up when we were studying the wage setting behavior. It turns out that that last term, which is the Z, is sort of like a residual that captures other factors, particularly the bargaining strength of the type of worker. But we fell short of actually modeling it like in a game theoretic way, because we didn't want to get into that for now. But that is a very good suggestion and one future direction that we can take. Definitely, your point is well taken on that. We should explore that more. Now, as to the second question, which is about, if I'm not mistaken, pointing out the importance of context in terms of, let's say, occupation or sector. I suppose our attempt at that is our choice of the sample, because our sample would be regional by sector. And I think Dr. Tabora can also enlighten us on that, that we try to account for the differences when it comes to regions and sectors. Carlos, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, Dr. Dixman. So our sample data set consists of the 16 subsectors and then 17 regions in the Philippines from 2013 and 2017. Right. Thank you.
Okay. Michael, please.
And then before I go, because I have to leave in like 3 minutes, just one quick question for Janelle. So Janelle, in your study, so you did propensity score matching, which is the standard way of doing program evaluation. So you look at intervention, etc. Did you conduct a balancing test to make sure that the distribution is actually a balance for the treatment and untreated? Thank you.
Yes po, sir. We compared the standardized differences per covariate before and after matching. And we also computed for the covariate variance ratios. So they had to be close to 1, which in our case, only 2 matching methods had at least one specific variable that had over 2, and the rest were close to 1 po. And we also did some box plots to compare the matching quality.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael, and thanks a lot for coming to this seminar, and we wish you well in your class tonight, and we hope to see you again in a future PS conference. Okay, any other questions from the floor, from the participants of the Zoom room. See, I have a couple of questions. So one for Janelle and also for the paper by Carlos and Noel. Janelle, can you describe a little bit about the indicator, yung gaining cash? Sorry, I think your cash transfer indicator is available in the FIES that has information on domestic sources of assistance, right? So, and my question is actually, why did you assume that these are conditional cash transfer recipients when they can be, for example, recipients of assistance, no, maybe by relatives or other groups, no, other than by the government.
Actually, sir, to give context, we started with conditional cash transfer po talaga, and we wanted to learn more about the PP, the 4Ps program. But then the FIES data didn't have a specific breakdown on that. So we used instead the domestic transfer that the domestic transfer na naka-indicate po doon. And the domestic transfer in their definition po are cash receipts from domestic sources. So they are cash transfers, but they are a lump sum of conditional and unconditional cash transfers po. So that's why also in our discussion of the paper that we said that there may be a heterogeneity in program impacts because of the difference in the type of cash transfer programs that were included in the variable po.
Okay, so thank you for the clarification. See, and then also for Noel and Carlos, my question is, I am assuming that in all of the regions and industries in your data set that you looked at, no, it's all yung mga males that actually have higher wages, no, than females. Or are there sort of cases that I don't know if there might be some industries where or regions where female wages are much higher than males. But well, of course, so normally it's actually males that have higher wages than females. But in any case, how it maybe it would be good. I mean, maybe just to show at least what these industries and regions are, and then I don't know. How do we interpret that data? I mean, the result, if in case that you have otherwise.
Maybe I can answer the first question, Dr. Digsman. When I look at the data set, the profile of the wage rates of male and female workers, there is at least one sector in the case of the Philippines where wage rates of female workers are higher than those of males, specifically in the professional services. It's dominated by female workers, and then their wage rates are higher than male workers.
Okay, thank you also for the clarification as well. No? But again, no, certainly, the paper is really a very interesting study. No? I think this measures, this looks at the wage differentials by gender, no? In terms of sort of a distortion. Okay, any other questions or comments from the Zoom audience? I see some of our Ateneo students here, Scott, Krisha, and earlier I think I saw one of our PhD students. So I don't know if she's here. Kalis. I don't think there are any. Okay, if there are no more questions, maybe if you would like to or give some closing remarks, Janelle, Carlos, or Noel, before we end. Okay. Okay.
Thank thank you po for this opportunity to present in the Philippine Economic Society. It has been a first for me, and regarding our study po, it is still there is still a lot of room for improvement in with regards to evaluating such programs as pointed out by Sir Tuano. There there can be a study if there were data. There can be a study more specific on the cash transfer, conditional cash transfer program of the Philippines, like 4Ps, so that we could evaluate it better and provide better insights for how we should proceed with our programs in the Philippines as well.
Carlos or Noel, I don't know if you have any closing statement.
On behalf of Carlos and myself, I wish to thank everyone in the audience for listening. No? And if you have, I know the time is short and sometimes you cannot think of your questions immediately, but in case you do have a question for us, you can always reach out to us. Well, I guess thank you very much. Carlos, do you want to say something?
Okay, thank you again for having us in this session and allowing us to present our paper. And you can always reach us, like what Dr. Digsman, if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael already had left, but again, thanks Janelle, Carlos, and Noel. So let's give the presenters again a loud warm of electronic applause. So thanks a lot for your presentations. Before we end, let me just remind you, the audience here, that just I think it was already posted in the chat now, an online attendance sheet. We will give an online evaluation form at the end of the conference. It will be sent to you via email. So please, hope if you receive that email, please help us improve the conference also for next year. And I'd like to remind also the participants of that there are several sessions that will also happen at 10 p.m. right after this forum. So there's one sponsored by First Metro Third on credit allocation, financial literacy outlook. Another session on economic and political governance beyond the crisis, sponsored by the stat-based ADRI. Another third session on what will make us leap forward, the BSP narrative, sponsored by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. And there are several papers on agriculture, natural resources, and environmental management that will also be presented at 10 o'clock. Then in the afternoon, at 1 p.m., there will be a general membership assembly where we will have our president, secretary, and also treasurer to report on the activities of the association. And then at 1:30 p.m., the plenary session on economic and financial literacy, which will focus on social protection programs in the Philippines. And at 3 o'clock, we will have our closing plenary session. So I do invite you, if you have time, to still attend some of our remaining sessions in the day. So again, on behalf of the Philippine Economic Society, again, I would like to thank you all and wish you a good day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Karen.